Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our, I can't believe, October Zoom presentation. My name is Craig LaDay. I'm one of the partners here at ICG Next, and on behalf of Michael and James, I want to thank all of you for your time and attention and quite frankly, years of service working together. We really do appreciate our relationship. Today, we're going to be talking about Social Security and unlocking its potential. But before we do that, we're going to hold all questions to the end. We want to be able to make sure that we get through the presentation, get through the material, but we will have plenty of time for questions and answers before our presentation ends. We carved out an hour for today. I believe the presentation is about a half hour, so we do have a fair amount of time earmarked for questions and answers. So certainly want to make sure we do that. As always, I want to thank Deb Pica for putting everything together and organizing today's presentation with Kevin Kelly, our representative, who we've been working with Kevin and the team at Hartford. They've been tremendous partners with us here at ICG Next over the years. We do value their relationship. So Kevin, thank you so much working with Deb to putting together today's presentation. We do really appreciate that. So with that, obviously, Social Security is a really hot topic, really big decisions that we need to make. Quite frankly, it's probably one of the biggest decisions that individuals make. And as an advisor for 38 years, it's probably a question that people ask me more than anything is like, when should I take my Social Security? And it's changed over time. Years ago, people were saying, well, Social Security will never be there when I retire. And before you know it, here you are at retirement, it's still here. And we still hear that it's not going to be here down the road, but we do believe that there's, with some adjustments, some modifications, we don't think that's a really big risk. Maybe Michael will share a little bit of an insight on that, but we do believe that Social Security has a major impact on providing durable income for retirees. And so when to take it, how to take it, and those types of things, we really want to kind of hone in on those areas to really try to help give you some ideas and some thoughts so that you could go back to your advisor, have a conversation about when and how you should take your Social Security so that you can maximize that. With that, I want to introduce Michael Lynch. Michael's been with Hartford Fund since I believe it was 2012, where he has been in regional sales director and also in a very significant national director for the Hartford Retirement Wealth Consulting Group. He's been on Fox Business, Today.com, Barron's, U.S. News and World Report, Market Watch, all across the board as an expert in various financial services fields. Graduate from Eastern Connecticut State with his undergraduate master's in studies of law from Wake Forest Law University. He is currently lives in Charlotte. And Michael, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to provide some value and some education to the folks here at ICG Next. Welcome, Michael.
Well, Craig, thanks very much. I appreciate it, Deb. Thank you for putting this together. Folks, thank you for taking some time out of your day. And as anytime we do webinars, I already got knocked out once, so I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe I got the official knockout, and hopefully we're good to go the rest of the way. I apologize. Technology is what it is sometimes, but do appreciate you taking some time today to learn hopefully a little bit more about Social Security. As Craig mentioned, I think it's an interesting topic. I do agree. I think years ago it was much easier to think about Social Security and take Social Security because honestly, it wasn't that long a time frame that we were going to draw down our Social Security. You may have had a relative or a friend or a neighbor or something that maybe lived in their 80s, 90s, if not longer, but now it's the norm. So the decision-making process really is one that we have to think about the next 20 or 30 years, maybe not the next 10 or 15 years. And I also think one of the great things about Social Security is the individualism or the flexibility. But one of the downsides is that flexibility. It'd be much easier if we said, hey, if you got on at 4 o'clock, you can file at 62, right? If you got a couple of minutes early, wait till 67 or 70. Where now it's really an individual decision. I meet a lot of couples where they're choosing 2 different options. So I think that adds to the complexity. But again, that's one of the benefits, I think, when it comes to Social Security. So tonight we want to talk a little bit about is kind of the history of Social Security and more importantly, where we think it's going forward. Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, but we do think at Hartford Funds that it's not going to go away altogether. We think it's too important a social program. In fact, Social Security is just now celebrating its 90th year, its 90th birthday in August of this past year. So the program's been around 90 years. I'd argue anybody that's in their 90s, they probably have changed a little bit over the years. And that's our thought process. I think one of the things about Social Security is when you think about when it first rolled out in 1935, it was part of the New Deal with FDR, amazing and sweeping reform. But again, life expectancy. In the mid 30s, when it first rolled out, the average male lived to 59. You didn't collect your benefit payment till 65. So if you kind of do the math there, you realize the majority of people that were entitled to Social Security, unfortunately, never lived long enough, or maybe got a short check or a couple checks, but really didn't live long enough. Where now, again, we're seeing that as more of the exception, where folks are, really living a lot longer. And that's one of the challenges. We think it's such an important program. We don't think it's going to go away altogether. I can't imagine someone at a podium saying on my watch, Social Security ended. The challenge is, what does it look like going forward? Is there sweeping reform or are there kind of drips and drabs? And that's what we've seen up to this point. So there's a section on the history of Social Security, and Ida Mae Fuller lived in Ludlow, Vermont. They claim she was the very first recipient of Social Security. Now, based on her age and timing, again, kind of broke the bank, right? She lived to be age 100, and she only paid in $24.75. She collected $22,000. Now, the first year they rolled out Social Security, and thankfully they ended it after the first year, they offered individuals to take a lump sum distribution. Now, I'm not sure what warranted Ernest Ackerman to take his 17 cents, but he took his 17 cents and ran, unfortunately. Now, if he lived as long as Ida Mae Fuller, he probably would have been challenged, right? But again, I think that's one of the things about Social Security. So when we sit down and think about it, we have to have a longer time frame. We have to really think about it, again, more of a marathon as opposed to possibly a sprint. And what I think is important, and I think the team probably has these conversations with you, is to think about Social Security in addition to other sources of income. From 1935, from day one, Social Security was never designed to be the sole source of income in retirement, but rather a source of income in retirement. So thinking about other sources or other legs, if you will, the three-legged stool, which I think is still a terrific analogy. So we want to be educated on Social Security. We want to have the knowledge of that. If you're lucky enough to get the leg in the middle there to pensions, it's really a foreign term nowadays. Unfortunately, most pensions have probably gone away. Hopefully a little stronger 401k or other types of options. So really at the end of the day, the leg you fully control, the leg you really can kind of shore up and make sure you're doing everything you can is that savings and investment, making sure we're contributing to our 401k, catch-up contributions, maybe including the Roth IRA, Roth 401ks. So I think what we're finding is the responsibility for a successful retirement is really being pushed back on us. When I see this slide, I often think of my dad. Unfortunately, passed a few years ago, but I remember him smiling and kind of whistling when he entered retirement. And he was a great guy, but he rarely smiled or whistled. And I'm thinking, what in the world? Then I realized he's entering retirement. He's got some partners. So he's got a strong Social Security, or had strong Social Security. He had a nice pension from his company. And if I'm honest, he probably didn't save enough, but because he had those three legs, he was in pretty good shape. Now, again, those legs are a little wobbly. We've got to, be cautious about it, but we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can, especially from a savings and investment standpoint. So what we'll talk tonight about is really timing from a Social Security perspective. It's usually the first question I get: when should I take my benefit? And unfortunately, there's no right or wrong. I don't give tax or legal advice, but I think there are pros and cons to each different age, and we'll talk about that. The role of work. For many of us, we might want to continue to work as long as possible. I'm meeting more and more folks where I say retirement, and they kind of push back a little bit, say, no, that was my dad or granddad. I want to continue to work, which I think is terrific. For many of us, it's our sense of purpose. It's who we are. We need to think about, if we continue to work and we're contributing or collecting from Social Security, or maybe both at the same time, what that means. Everybody's favorite on a Thursday night, taxation, right? We'll spend about 5 minutes on taxes because really, unfortunately, there's some good news, but not great news. And then we'll think about and talk about awareness. At the end of the day, what are you actually entitled to? So again, from a timing perspective, if we paid in Social Security or married someone who's paid in Social Security, we're entitled to take that benefit as early as age 62. Now, it's not to say it's right or wrong. We just need to be aware of the fact if we do take it early, It's about 70 cents on the dollar on average. We have the opportunity of waiting till 63, 64, 65. You see on the slide there in the middle, FRA. That's full retirement age. Now, for all of us on the call years ago, that started at age 65. It's kind of a hard and fast rule. Once I turned 65, full retirement age. Well, one of the programs they put in place and one of the changes a few years ago was to gradually push up full retirement age from 65 to 67. Now, thankfully, they didn't just change it overnight. They said, let's kind of grandfather people in. So you see in the middle there, if you were born in 56, for example, your new full retirement age is 66 and 4 months. If you were born in 58, 66 and 6 months. I was born in 1964. So my full retirement age now is 67. Why that's important is that's generally your max benefit. Now you also see kind of that speedometer, right? It goes up to 70. So that's an opportunity to delay your benefit. So say I'm working at Hartford Funds, I'm 67, want to continue to work. They're nice enough to let me continue to work. I don't want my benefit, don't need my benefit. I can delay the benefit. I can delay it up to 68, 69, and 70. Now I cannot delay it any further than 70, or I can, but I can't get a benefit. And the benefit during that delay section is 8%. So I always think of it as kind of a sweetener. If I don't need my Social Security benefit, I don't want my Social Security benefit, I can delay it between full retirement age and the age of 70. Now, as I mentioned, you can delay. In fact, you never have to take your Social Security benefit, right? I could delay till 92. There aren't many folks out there. I think Social Security would love us if we did. But realistically, at the age of 70, that's when this benefit increase stops. So if I delay to 68, 8%, 69, 8%. And what's great about this section is it's not like I contact Social Security and say, I want to delay till 70. I just simply choose not to take my benefit. And each year it's increased. So again, pros and cons to each. I like to think of it more numerically. So if I took it early, and it's just as an example, somebody whose full retirement age is 67, if I took it early, it'd be about $1,400. So you see kind of that discount or the lower amount. Gradually, it goes up each year. Full retirement age in this case would be $2,000. And then if I chose to delay in that green section, each year I delayed, that benefit increases by 8%. So what I like to do when I think about Social Security is instead of thinking about the word when should I take it? There's been books written, articles written. I often say it quite a bit in seminars myself. Think about a different word, maybe a different question. What? What income do you need? Let's talk about how much you need from a Social Security perspective. Maybe even more importantly, if you haven't talked to the team yet, maybe take a step back and say, what do we need total in retirement? Now, it's okay if you're not sure. I don't think there are many folks, right at 65 to say, I know exactly how much I need. But it's an opportunity to have a conversation. Let's start talking about that. Then how much do we think we need from Social Security? Basically, if you say, gosh, I need about $1,400, well, good news. We can start as early as age 62. If you say I need a little bit more, I probably need closer to 2,000. We may have to wait till full retirement age. If you say I really need a little bit more, to 2480 or more, might have to come up with plan B, right? Or we may have to think about other sources of income. But I think it's been a helpful process for me in particular, and I know folks I've met with, if I can really kind of put some pen to paper. Now, again, you may have to make some adjustments, but I think it's a starting point. And say, what income do we need from Social Security? If you can tell us the what, we can almost tell you the when. Again, right or wrong, there's pros and cons to each, but I think there's an opportunity. A couple of things to note about this. If you're not sure what your full retirement age is, I would encourage you to go out to ssa.gov. So it's the Social Security Administration's website, ssa.gov. Once you're out there, set up an account. Once you have the account set up, you can take a look and see what your full retirement age is, what your benefits are. And then I would encourage you just to take a minute or two. There's an area, if you click on it, that talks about income, how much you've contributed to Social Security from the time you've worked. Now's the time to just make sure that's accurate. Now, do it with a grain of salt. I went out there and I looked, and it had income from the time I was 15 years of age, which I always thought was funny because legally you can't work till 16, but apparently it's okay to contribute to Social Security when you're 15. Now, I don't know if that $1,200 was correct or not, but I do know for about the past 10 or 15 years how much I've contributed to Social Security. I think 99.9% of us, that information is going to be correct, but now's the opportunity to just verify that accuracy. So again, ssa.gov, set up an account. You may be thinking, gosh, I'll just wait. I get that flyer in the mail. They're actually suppressing that white flyer that we used to get. It was about 90 days before our birthday. they're kind of pulling those back just from a cost perspective. They want us to set up these accounts and have this information. Once we do, it'll give us the latest and greatest information. As I mentioned, the role of work, I think this is continuing to evolve. For many folks, again, post-pandemic and the flexibility of doing a webinar like this, right, or working remotely, many companies are thrilled that people want to stay. For many of us, we may want to continue to work. It's kind of who I am, my sense of purpose, right? What do I do to fill that time sometimes? Or maybe it's a new role. Maybe it's part-time, scaling back a little bit. Whatever the case may be, you need to be aware of the fact that if you choose to file prior to your full retirement age, there's a very small threshold you're entitled to earn. Once you get above this threshold and kind of grow higher, unfortunately, withholding kicks in. So the check that you thought you were going to get, it may be a little bit lower because there is some withholding. So again, maybe the idea is I'm 62 years of age. I'm concerned about Social Security going away. Have no intention of stopping. I'm not going to retire, but I'm concerned and I want to file. Well, if I'm making below $24,400 in earned income, and it's just for me, it's individually based, and it would just be earned income, not pension income, rental income, any of those things. If I'm below that, then I'm fine. I can collect my Social Security and I'll get my full amount. But literally, if I start to maybe do a little bit better and I get a $2 raise, 23,402, unfortunately, Social Security withholds $1 from my check. I go another $2 above it, withhold $1. So a quick rule of thumb is if you're making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, and I'll show you an example in a minute, you're going to get a check that is a lot less than you thought you were going to get because of this withholding. So it's something you need to be aware of. I meet countless people that really don't know about this, and they're shocked because they filed thinking they were going to get X, and unfortunately they got Y. Now, the year you turn full retirement age, thankfully, the amount is a little bit higher. You see 62,160. But same kind of government math there, if you will. For every $3 above it, they withhold $1. Another $3 above it, they withhold $1. Now, add full retirement age and after. So again, I'm 67 and a half. Say I retired from Hartford Funds and, kind of sitting on the couch thinking about how great retirement is going to be. 2 months later, I'm still sitting on the couch thinking about how great retirement is. My wife kind of checks in with me and says, maybe you should go back to work, right? Part-time, full-time. I can file and I'll get my full benefit, regardless if I go back to work or not. I can earn $1 or $10 million. It's not going to matter. My benefit is not reduced. So I'll show you a quick example here. If I'm making $46,000, I'm 62, I'm concerned about Social Security going away. I want to start getting my check, which I think many of us are at that point, right? Because of the fact that there are some challenges and some issues with Social Security. Well, look at the annual limit, $23,400. I'm above it by about $22,000, give or take. Most importantly, look in the bottom in the parentheses. I filed expecting I was going to get $1,500 a month, where unfortunately, because of the withholding, now I only get $558 a month. That's about $942. God bless our marketing people, right? They can't round up for me. I think it's about $942 a month that I'm not going to be receiving. It's going to be withheld from that check. So it's a real eye-opener to say, I thought I was going to get $1,500. Now I'm getting $5 plus. Now, one of the keys, though, is withholding. Technically, once I either get below that 23,400, maybe I retire, maybe I scale back, whatever the case may be, I will get that full 1,500, and I also get any of the withholding back. Now, one of the keys, unfortunately, is they don't send me a check. So say I filed 62, I'm above the cap, they start clipping or they start withholding about 900 plus. 3 years later, my situation changes. My check goes back up to 1,500, maybe a little bit higher with cost of living. I don't get a lump sum check for all those years, those monthly payments. I will get paid back, but it's paid back to me on my life expectancy. So you may see that $1,500 go up by a couple hundred a month. So that's the key. One of the issues and one of the challenges, quite honestly, is will I live long enough to get paid that withholding back? But again, I think for a lot of folks, and not to say it's wrong to file at 62, but I just need to think about, am I going to continue to work for the next 3 or 4 years? Or is it the next 3 or 4 months? Maybe I want to process my paperwork, thinking about other sources of income. If it makes sense, certainly want to go through this. But I've actually met people, 60, 70, 80 plus $1,000. You're not going to get a check. You're going to get zero. So again, it kind of warrants, why would I lock myself in to a lower amount? And then, kind of insult to injury, on top of that, I don't get a check. Now, again, everybody's different, but you want to have a conversation about it. And I think that really is one of the key things with Social Security is to kind of talk about it. Talk about your situation, talk about your personal situation and what works best for you. Taxation. Now, if you follow the campaign like I did, and we were looking at both candidates, and all of a sudden, President Trump one day he was up at the podium and kind of had the background like I do, right, with the blue background, and it said no taxes on Social Security. And I think for many of us in the industry, it kind of caught us off guard because, when did that pass, right? So it was a great tagline, and that was the intention to not have to pay taxes on Social Security. Now, the one big beautiful bill passed, and one of the features of the beautiful bill was not that Social Security is going to be tax free. But what was negotiated, I think, is a good step forward, and that is basically a tax deduction. So it was a tax deduction, and we'll talk about it in a second, but it helps, I think, for many situations and many folks to either lower or put you in a different situation where maybe you're not going to pay taxes on Social Security. Now, the way Social Security is adjusted or calculated, and hopefully you have a good tax professional, you'd have to go through this process, but it's your modified adjusted gross income. Now, when I talked before about individuals and whether there's withholding or not, that's just based on each individual. So it's my wife and I. If my wife's not working, then she's in a different situation than I'm in. So it really is more applicable for individual. When we come to taxation, if we're married filing jointly, then it's modified adjusted gross income, which we know the number's probably a little bit higher, but also sometimes, maybe not have as much flexibility. Half our Social Security benefit is added back in, and that equals what they call your combined or provisional income. Now, if that number is below 25,000 married, if you're a single filer, or 32,000 married filing jointly, the good news is you're not going to pay taxes on your Social Security benefit. If, however, $25,000, $34,000, $32,000, $44,000 married filing jointly, it means up to half your Social Security may be subject to taxation. Now, it doesn't mean you're in a 50% category. Thankfully, there is no 50% bracket today. It just simply means if I'm collecting, say, $2,000 a month from Social Security, that's $24,000 a year. Half of that, or $12,000, may be subject to taxation at the current rate. Now, if we're not going to file for another 4 or 5 years, we don't know what the current rates are, right, in the future. But we do know approximately how much they are, probably high teens, low 20s right now. And we're just talking federal, not state. But from a federal standpoint, we can do that calculation. If you're at $34,000 and above, $44,000 and above, then you're going to pay taxes on the majority of it, or up to 85%. Now, as I mentioned, one of the changes, and it's applicable 2025 going forward, it only applies to those of us that are over age 65. So if it's you and your spouse, you're thinking about filing and you're both 62, or one's 64, the other one's 62, this benefit is not includable. This tax deduction does not apply to you. You have to be over age 65. If it's a husband and wife, both have to be over 65. The cap is $6,000. So that's what you're able to deduct. If you're married filing jointly over 65, it's a $12,000 deduction. And there are phase-out limits, unfortunately. Starts at about $75,000 for single, $150,000 for married filing jointly. But again, I think what they're thinking is those folks 75 and below, 150 and below, it's probably going to hit and help about 80% of the population out there that are paying taxes on Social Security to either lower that number or to help with the tax deduction. Again, that max of $12,000. So is it the greatest thing in the world? No. But I think it's a great step forward, because as we talked about Social Security and wanting to be here for future generations, things have to change. So this is a change. And I think what it tells us is hopefully both parties are starting to talk, although right now they're having a challenge, but both parties were talking and kind of coming to an agreement. So hopefully we'll see more changes down the road, even better changes, hopefully. Another option, you may want to sit down and talk about, thinking about those three-legged stools, the three-legged stool of retirement, I should say, and thinking about your sources of income in retirement. And I calculate my modified adjusted gross income, I file for Social Security, and I need some extra income a month. So I'm drawing down my IRA, say $5,000 a month. Well, that $5,000 a month is includable in this calculation. If, however, I converted my IRA to a Roth years ago, held it for 5 years, over 59 and a half, obviously, then if I'm taking that $5,000 out of the Roth, it's not includable in this calculation. If I had contributed to a Roth 401k years ago, and I've got money in a Roth, I can draw that money down It's not includable in this calculation. Now that's applicable today. I will say the Roth isn't right for everybody. I'd certainly have a conversation, include your tax professional. But a lot of folks are starting to think about Roth, especially for a portion of their income, and think about whether it makes sense. I think there are a number of strategies you can kind of work with your tax professional on to see, what's the best situation for me. But I think this is an interesting one to at least begin to have a conversation. Now, most importantly, from an awareness perspective, usually I guess folks come up afterwards and say, that was great, but what am I entitled to? What do I actually get from a Social Security perspective? So we're entitled, especially if we're married, to one of three benefits: our own individual benefit, a spousal benefit, or a survivor or a death benefit. Now, we only get one of three. We don't get two or three out of three. It'd be great if we did. And we'll get whichever is greatest. Meaning if my individual benefit is higher than, say, a spousal benefit, then I would get my own. If the reverse were true, then I would get a spousal benefit. If I lost my spouse and their benefit was higher than mine, I may get that for the rest of my life. So the nice part is Social Security will help us with this. And again, they'll send us one check, whichever is largest. So I'll show you an example. Let's take a look at Angela and John. And for a minute, we're going to forget about John. We're going to assume he's working and he's not part of the conversation. Angela's 67. She just retired and she contacts Social Security. Now, based on her earnings and the years that she's contributed to Social Security, they figure out that she's entitled to $947 a month. So she starts taking her $947. Let's say 6 months later, John says, hey, this retirement thing's not such a bad idea, right? Maybe I'll retire. Or maybe he just continues to work, but he files. He's over full retirement age. As I mentioned, no reduction, right? No withholding. And they determined that he's entitled to $29.45. Now, once John files, Angela can inquire about the spousal benefit. Now, the spousal benefit is up to 50% of John's benefit or your spouse's benefit. Now, we'll tell you the two words people never hear is up and to, because I think 50 is just too easy. It's too easy to remember. It's too easy to do the calculation. Both people have to be the same age and above full retirement age to get 50%. Meaning if John was 67 and Angela was 62 and they went through this situation, well, Angela's younger. She's not going to get 50%. She might get 30, 35%. So the idea behind this is to get 50%, both either have to be the same age and over full retirement age. But ideally, once John files, now Angela contacts the Social Security Administration. It says, I want to inquire about the spousal benefit. Now, again, the spousal benefit up to 50%, they do the calculation. She's actually entitled to $14.72. Well, John gets his $29.45, and the good news is Angela gets an increase now from $9.47 to $14.72. A couple things about this. The spousal benefit. To get this benefit, John has to file. That's why I mentioned early, let's forget about John. He hasn't filed. Well, if Angela contacts Social Security right away and said, I want to inquire about the spousal, they would look up and say, well, John hasn't filed. It's as if John doesn't exist. You're not going to get 50% of zero. So she would just get her own benefit. Again, once John's on the books and he files, then we have the flexibility. Why I make such a big point of this is years ago, we had a little more flexibility. It was a thing called file and suspend. A lot of folks had heard about it. It was a terrific idea, terrific concept. And the idea behind it was the larger earner, in this case, John, he files, but he immediately suspends. Two reasons why he wants to do that. He wants to let his benefit grow, but he also wants to make the spousal benefit in play or available. Angela can file, she can look at the spousal, and Angela would get the $14.72 and John's would continue to grow. Now, unfortunately, for this to be applicable, both people have to file. So now John's can't continue to grow behind the scenes. It was a terrific strategy, quite honestly. A lot of people took advantage of it. It was so good that the press got a hold of it, and then Social Security said, it's a terrific idea. We're going to shut it down, unfortunately. So that's where, we really want to sit down and think about that what question. What income do I need? And then kind of go through the process. Now, unfortunately, if there's a spouse that passes away, so same situation. The only difference here is John never filed. John continued to work, unfortunately, until the day he died, and was contributing to Social Security. Angela took her $947. I think it's about 5 years later. So some cost of living adjustments in there. So Angela now has $1157. John passes away, not collecting, and he was entitled to $3,600. He could have collected too, but in this example, they say he didn't collect, but it was worth $3,600. Now Angela gets 100% of John's. So Angela will continue to get this, and she gets an increase from $1,157 to $3,600, and she'll get that for the rest of her life. Now, I have seen some situations. I actually have a neighbor. I'm not sure how we came up with this conversation, but she had mentioned to me, I knew her husband had passed a couple of years ago, but she mentioned to me one of the challenges that they faced after his passing is they were small business owners. They paid each other the same amount of money. They were also getting the same amount of Social Security. She was collecting about $2,000 a month. He was collecting $2,000 a month. Now, I live in a smaller town-owned community, kind of downsized years ago. Well, she already downsized. They went down to one car. Well, after his passing, before they were collecting $4,000 a month as a couple, as a family. John passes away, or her husband passed away in this case. What happens? She technically gets a reduction because she only gets the $2,000. She doesn't get his check plus hers. So it becomes a real challenge. She's already, again, downsized. She wants to eat. She wants to be able to get gasoline, all those types of things. So it does become a situation. And we've got to think about that. If you and your spouse have about a similar benefit amount, what am I going to do to replace that $2,000 a month? But that's the idea behind the survivor benefit. And again, a rule of thumb with Social Security is if John was, say, 67, Angela again was 62, she's not going to get 100%. She would get a little bit less. So anytime we do anything prior to full retirement age, probably looking at a reduction. Again, not to say it's right or wrong, but I always think about Social Security in two different ways. Prior to full retirement age, may be right and may be wrong, but I don't have as much flexibility sometimes as if I wait till full retirement age or above. Sometimes I have more flexibility. So we kind of wrap this up, but I think there are a couple of key things that you want to think about. Again, the role of work. Am I going to continue to work? I think this will be the first generation, and you may have some relatives or someone you knew that was in their 70s collecting Social Security, paying in the Social Security, but it was really the exception. I think it's going to be the norm going forward. So it'll be interesting to see what actually happens to your Social Security payment. Will it increase down the road, which it probably will. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think that's something you want to think about. Is this extra income? Be great if it was, right? You could use it to fund a 529, life insurance, a dream vacation, whatever the case may be. But thinking about that, where does this income come into play? Will I have to pay taxes on it? Again, I think a good step forward was to see this tax deduction. Again, a max of 12,000 or 6,000 individually, potentially over age 65. I think it's a step in the right direction, but hopefully we'll see some changes down the road. And then last but not least, hopefully you can't answer the last question. How long will I live? I will say, I think as boomers, many times we're still comparing to our life expectancy to our parents and grandparents. Maybe dad passed away at 70, mom 75, and you're in the back of your mind thinking, well, it's 78, 79. I think 89, if not 99, is a little bit more of a realistic option. So life expectancy. This generation is going to live a lot longer, a lot healthier, and a lot more active than prior generations. I'm up in Boston right now, and one of our partners is MIT. We work with Massachusetts Institute of Technology, an area called the AIDS Lab at MIT. And this gentleman, Dr. Joe Coughlin, runs the Age Lab. And as the name says, they study aging, all aspects of aging. And one thing Dr. Joe at MIT tells us all the time is we are going to live a lot longer than prior generations. So again, we need to think about this more of a 20 or 30 year type of duration, not a 10 or 15 year type of duration. So we want to go through and see what's the best option for us. So I think really to take the benefit of this is really to have a conversation and think about all different factors. What's the best strategy for me? Again, because a friend, a relative, a neighbor chose an option, that might be the best option for you. It might be the exact wrong option for you. So I think having someone that you can talk to who knows me, knows my spouse, knows my kids, what my goals are, I think that puts you in the best position. So from a just a summary perspective, again, timing, no right or wrong, but we want to kind of go through the process. And I think it's great to be able to illustrate those and see what makes sense. The role of work continues to evolve, so we want to be ahead of that. Taxation. And I think especially from an awareness perspective, because we are approaching age 2033, 2037, Social Security has been very open and honest. Unless something changes, there are going to be some challenges with Social Security. So I think from an awareness perspective, this isn't a one and done conversation. We're going to have to really get in front of this and probably be a little more sensitive to it and a little more keen to it as we progress from a year perspective. So if we see something that changes, something that maybe negatively affects us, we want to have a conversation and say, maybe now's the time. Maybe I was waiting. Maybe now's the time. Or maybe it's a positive change. my expectation was to start at 62, but now maybe I've got a little bit more time. Maybe I can wait till 64 or 67 or whatever the time frame is. So we want to make sure we talk about that. So Craig, and again, the team, thank you very much for the opportunity tonight. I appreciate it. And if we've got some questions, certainly be glad to address them.